Well, good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing? Man, it is such an honor to be back here in Heartland, Rockford, in the snow. And you all have made it, and I'm sorry that I brought bad weather. I really am. But it's an honor to be a part. Eric Parks, didn't he do a fantastic job last week? He's as good as they come. And he and I, we've been talking and had a long phone conversation a couple of weeks ago, and just working with many of the staff here and really trying to create just an amazing 6-week series called Come to the Table. And we really want to look at kind of the words of Jesus. We want to look at those that walked closely to him. And I think in this day and age, 2020, I think is going to be one of the craziest years ever. I don't know if you already sense that. We're not even half of a month in, and it just feels like there is just stuff happening in our world. And don't even get me started about social media. You go on social media, and it's just people speaking and screaming. And then what ends up happening is we find ourselves just wanting to react. And then we start saying things. And then people start saying things. And it just becomes this dysfunctional cycle of just noise while the rest of the world is just watching. And they're watching and they're wondering, hey, what does truth look like? What's grace look like? What does the teachings of Jesus look like? And really, I feel like more than ever before, how we engage with our neighbor, how we engage with people online, how we engage with those that we really don't even know, how we engage with those that are different than us is more critical today than it's ever been. More critical today than it's ever been. And on top of that, as Ed Stetzer, he wrote a book recently called The Age of Outrage. I feel like we're living where like everything is like boiling under the surface. And so people are just saying things on Twitter, saying things on Facebook, saying things on talk radio, saying things in opinions in like Chicago Tribune. I mean, people are saying things. And I have just become wildly fascinated around the question, why do people do what they do? Like, I don't know about you, but I found myself really, really fascinated. Like, why did she say that? Why did he post that? Why did they say it like that? And I'm watching even within me just these desires to react. These desires to put somebody in their place. And what I want to do today is not talk about them, why they do what they do. I want to talk about us. I want to talk about what it does within us. Because I kid you not, 2020 is going to be absolutely bananas. I'm sure for many of you, you don't ever want to pick up your phone because most of the calls that are coming in, you don't know the number. And it's some political party trying to get you to give or like tell you about what they want you to vote for. Or some kind of thing asking for money. And I think in some ways you sit here and you just go, goodness me, can I just get a respite from the noise and the crazy? And I just want to tell you, Jesus' disciples had some words for this. And again, it's really easy to look at other people and go, why do they do what they do? But I really want to wrestle with, why does it do what it does within us? And then I want to go to Jesus and I want to look at like something that he got really angry about. Because I think anger is not a bad thing. It's just got to be directed towards the right things. And so to do that, I want you to turn to 1 Peter chapter 2. If you have a Bible, if not, it'll be up on the screen. And I want you to kind of hear a church that is just going through just a ton. They're distracted. Many of them are afraid. They're afraid to kind of speak up. They're afraid to kind of engage because they're afraid of suffering and persecution. And so it's a really, really dark time. And Peter, a disciple that walks so closely to Jesus, has some words for this church that's scattered all through the ancient Near East. And he says this in verse 14, as obedient children, do not conform to the evil desires you had when you lived in ignorance, when you lived formerly as not a follower of Jesus. But, verse 15, just as he who called you is holy, so be holy in all you do. For it is written, be holy, because I am holy. Now, this word holy is a fascinating one because many of us know that many people translate it as living a life that is set apart. Set apart. A life that it's on mission as a disciple, living out the teachings of your rabbi, choosing to not kind of live in connection with the way of the world and the pattern of brokenness, but choosing to live in mission, connected, consecrated towards the vision and the values of Christ. And oftentimes when I think about this, I think about holy being someone who makes decisions from a whole, not fractured or broken place, from a set apart and consecrated place, and from a spiritually healthy place, because they have been healed by the goodness of grace. But as I think about this passage, what really, really hits me is just be holy in all you do. Not just like be holy 1 hour of the week. Not just be holy every once in a while. Not just be holy like when you're engaging with a person that you don't know, but be holy with every single action, decision, and word that comes out of your mouth. It ought to come from a whole, holy, and spiritually healthy place. And I'm sure if I asked you today, how many of you already failed at that? We'd probably all raise our hands. And this is it. And the question I end up like really wrestling with is this. Why do people make decisions that are unholy? Why do people make decisions that come from a place of just brokenness, choosing to not live a life that's set apart for the kingdom, not a spiritually healthy place? Because I don't think any of you wake up one day and go, you know what I want to do? I really want to blow up my marriage. I don't think anybody wakes up and goes, you know what I really wanted to do? I really want to train wreck my life. You know what I really want to do? I really want to just absolutely destroy my relationships. I don't think anybody makes that up. But somehow this happens. So why? And in this age of outrage, I want us to look at why we make the decisions that we make, why we react in the ways that we react. And to do that, I'm going to take you to the city of Chicago. And the city of Chicago is the greatest example for why we do what we do. Because I love the city of Chicago, third largest city in the U.S. There's culture, there's diversity, there's a marathon. And I've only ran it once and I will never do it again. It's too far. But there's so much beauty. But do you know what there is also in the city of Chicago? Potholes. They are everywhere. You find yourself driving, and you know it's springtime in Chicago when like the orange barrels are out in full bloom. And you find yourself just driving around these potholes. And I remember one time I hit one, and I pulled the car over because right away I knew I got a flat tire. And so Chicago has this number, I think you might know this, you dial 311, and you can report a pothole. It's awesome. And if the pothole has been reported and there's been a significant period of time where the city hasn't actually taken care of that pothole, they will literally pay for the damage done to your car. No wonder the state of Illinois is about to go bankrupt. And so I end up pulling the car over. I call 311. I'm not going to lie. I was praying. God, I pray for clerical error. Someone's got to pay for my flat tire. I was hoping someone had reported it. Nobody had. This woman begins to strike up a conversation. I'm a teacher, so I get really curious. My wife can't stand it because I'll find myself just talking with someone because I'm like, that could be a sermon, that could be a sermon, that could be a sermon. And I'm talking with this woman, and I'm just saying, you've got your own number for potholes. How many potholes have you filled in? And she's like, well, that's interesting. The Chicago Tribune just did a story on us. And I'm like, oh, okay. She goes, from January 1st to March 21st, 2018, just in less than 100 days, you know how many potholes we filled in? I said, no. She goes, you want to guess? I said, no. But she said, no, guess. And so I said, I don't know, 10,000. She goes, a little bit more. I said, 25,000. She goes, a little bit more. I said, 35,000. She said, a little bit more. I said, ma'am, you sound like my dad. He asked me a question that he already knows the answer to. We just wasted 3 minutes. You can just tell me. And she said, hey, one more guess. I said, okay, 50,000. She said, wrong. here's how many: 175,000 potholes in less than 100 days. She said, even if you go to the city of Chicago, website, no joke, they actually have a pothole tracker. They actually show their work. My 6th grader won't show his work in math, but the city of Chicago will. And I tell you this because this is literally what this team will do. They go out, and potholes are caused because water freezes, right? Like it did last night. Asphalt can't handle the elasticity, and it expands, and it creates this hole in the asphalt, this pothole. And so city workers from the city of Chicago, they go and they inspect it, and they look at it, and they go, okay, just add a little bit of asphalt, good to go. You all know what this is like. When you've woken up early, you found yourself studying the teachings of Jesus, you've got a little bit of Heartland worship playing or Hillsong worship playing, you've had your coffee, and you're driving, and as you're driving, somebody cuts you off, and you're like, I had my coffee, I've heard my worship, I've been in God's word, and what do? Grace. You just give them grace. You remove coffee, and you're not giving them grace, you're giving them something else, right? And there's something that happens. But here's the thing. Sometimes potholes aren't caused by water that just freezes and expands. There's something else going on. And a couple years ago in the city of Chicago, a 73-year-old man was driving and had the ride of his life when he drove over a pothole that became a sinkhole. He ended up being okay. But here's what you need to understand, is that sometimes those city workers will go out and they'll inspect the pothole and they'll realize this wasn't caused by inclement weather. There's something happening underneath the surface. That's a leaky sewage pipe. There's some sense of erosion that's happening. And if we don't deal with that, a pothole can quickly become a sinkhole. And our personal potholes can become sinkholes that cause incredible relational pain for another. And here's all that I want you to understand. In your story, based on being abandoned, based on being neglected, based on trauma, based on abuse, based on brokenness, based on some sin patterns in your story or in your family, we have potholes. And here's the craziest thing. Is people get close to our potholes. And when they get close to our potholes, it elicits some sense of reaction. And I believe today, why there is this age of outrage is because there's a lack of awareness of our personal potholes. And what I want us to do is I want us to become aware of what I call the thing beneath the thing. And if we can actually get to that, I think our potholes won't become sinkholes, and we won't cause relational pain towards another, but we'll actually get to experience what healing and grace and truth is all about. A number of years ago, I was a pastor in Southern California, and there was a person who reminded me of someone who deeply wounded me as a child. And I remember coming home, and I tell my wife, and I said, babe, you got to understand, this guy, man, he reminds me of this person who's deeply wounded me. And you know what my wife said? My wife goes, isn't God so kind? I was like, wait, what? No, I'm looking for a little backup. She's like, no, God's so kind. I'm like, why is God so kind? And this was her answer. She says, well, God's so kind because you have an area in your story that you have not addressed. You have not had the courage to address it. And God's so kind because he keeps bringing people into your life until you honor its truth. And I looked at her and I said, get behind me, Satan. I didn't say that. But I couldn't believe it. What I was looking for was for her to back me up and be like, yeah, that person's so mean, that person's wrong. And she was saying, you know what? Isn't God so kind because he recognizes you have a pothole in your story. And it's eliciting this reaction within you. And until you actually deal with that truth, man, it's going to quickly become a sinkhole. And God doesn't want that. And so, this is what I want to get after today. Your potholes and where you go when somebody gets close to him. And then we'll go from there and talk about one moment where Jesus got angry for all the right reasons. Back to 1 Peter, it says this, therefore, rid yourselves of all malice and all deceit. All malice and all deceit. I love this passage because Peter's going to talk to us about 5 things we need to get out of our life. But here's the thing. When we talk about kind of going somewhere, when someone gets close to our potholes, it's because we have been triggered. And when we're triggered, it incites a pain point in our story. Someone gets too close to our potholes. And for many of us, we're going to go somewhere. And one of 4 places that we will go, and it doesn't matter how old you are, we're going to go to one of these 4 places. And the first place that many of us choose to go is in hiding, where we try to escape the pain of our story. And for many of us, we escape the pain of our story, and we learn about this in Genesis chapter 3, where the man and the woman, it's like the first game of hide and seek, and they go hiding, and God seeks them out. But we find ourselves hiding, and we can hide online, we can hide in social media, we can hide with overworking, we can hide with overeating, we can hide with like over-purchasing, we can hide in so many places to try and escape actually addressing the triggered pothole. And many of us do this. We rack up credit card debt. We find ourselves just soothing with some counterfeit, whether Netflix, social media, work. And all we're doing is hiding. And this is what Peter says. Therefore, rid yourselves of all malice and all deceit. And malice is an old school word. I love it because it just talks about like the brokenness and the evil within. Doesn't even mean that it comes out, but it's within us. We've got to try and rid ourselves of that. And to rid ourselves of deceit. And all deceit really is the art of hiding. Hiding your true self. And so when many of us get triggered, you got to ask yourself, what triggers me, number 1? And the second question is, where do I go in hiding? Where do I hide and escape this pain? But there's a second place that many of us go. And in that verse, it says, therefore, rid yourselves of all malice and all deceit. And then it drops 2 more words, hypocrisy and envy. So rid yourself of all malice, all deceit, all hypocrisy, and all envy. The second place that many of us go is when we get triggered is to insecurity. And this is where we create a story about ourselves that's untrue. And I see this. I see this with young people all the time. Sometimes they'll get triggered, and all of a sudden, what do they tell themselves? I'm not enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. It's all the enough phrases. And they just find themselves just with all of this pressure. And it's not even peer pressure. It's just personal pressure that they put on themselves, and they're literally just falling to this weight. And this insecurity is just holding them back. And I love what Peter says. He goes, you got to rid yourself of all hypocrisy and all envy. Now, hypocrisy, many of you know this, is the word for actor in the Greek culture. A city like Ephesus had an auditorium that sat 23 to 25,000 people. There was no microphones. It was outside. You'd have an actor, a hypocrite, who would get up on stage, and they would have like a box or a backpack, and then inside that bag or box were a whole bunch of masks. And they would put on the mask, and they would become this character, different voice, different persona. And then they would become a different character, and they'd switch the mask. And it'd be this one actor, hypocrite play, but they'd play many parts. And I don't know about you, but I watch this. I watch when someone gets triggered, when someone gets close to their potholes, and literally what ends up happening is someone puts on a mask to say, I got to be a pretender. Or I got to be a pleaser. I got to try and keep everybody happy. Or I got to be a performer. I got to make everybody laugh. Or I got to be perfect. I got to try and look like I got it all together, and I can't be any cracks, any failures. And they're just pretending and perfecting, and literally all I see is profound levels of insecurity. And in that, you think about what kind of choices will be made from that place. isn't going to be life-giving, kingdom-altering decisions. It's going to be made from a place of brokenness. But some people in their insecurity don't go low. They actually find themselves trying to put on a mask of power. And their pride kicks in. I'm not wrong. They're wrong. And they find themselves just puffing themselves up, trying to act like they have it all together. And I love what Peter's saying is you got to rid yourself of all of that tendency to play the part of a hypocrite. You know, the word sincerity in Greek is so beautiful because it's two words in Greek that have been brought together. Ana, hypocrite. And it literally means like not a hypocrite. And really what it means is sincerity is to drop the mask and to be seen. To be seen. Real, honest, human, broken, failures, cracks, potholes in all to be seen. And then it says rid yourself of all hypocrisy, but also rid yourself of all envy. And envy, I think, is like the secret curse of humanity. You can see pride because you can see someone powering up. You can see someone acting like they have it all together when they don't. But envy is a little bit more subversive. And often we like to think of envy and coveting and jealousy as like synonyms, but really they're wildly different in the biblical understanding. They're cousins, but they're not siblings. And coveting is, I covet my neighbor's stuff, their car, their life, what they post on social media. But jealousy, I can't be jealous of anything my neighbor has because my neighbor doesn't belong to me. My wife can be jealous of my time. As God can be jealous for his kids, we can only be jealous for what belongs to us. I can covet what my neighbor has, but I can't be jealous of it. Envy is the darker stepchild. And what I mean by that is envy is literally, I believe that my neighbor has something and I don't want them to have it. And I actually believe that there's only so much goodness that is in the atmosphere. And so what I'm going to do is I'm not going to pray for more blessing for my neighbor. I am going to give them, and this is like, you'll see this in the Bible, I'm going to give them literally the evil eye. I'm going to give them like it's like a 2-year-old giving you the stink eye. And I'm going to actually pray curses on you in hopes that your life falls apart so that the goodness and favor that you've had might be released back in the atmosphere and I might be able to get some goodness. And they really believed that grace and goodness and favor had no free refills, that there was only a limited supply. And so in the insecurity of people, they find themselves becoming wildly envious or very, very deeply hypocritical, and because they're going low or powering up. But then, Peter doesn't just stop there. He says, hey, therefore rid yourselves of all malice and all deceit, all hypocrisy and all envy. And look what he ends with, and all kinds of slander. Slander. And this is what we see in our culture. We see people getting triggered, their potholes, someone getting really, really close to their potholes, and what happens? They begin to rage. Rage with their words. Rage with their fists. They begin to gossip and slander. They begin to kind of speak against another person. And really, what I see in this is when we get triggered, for many of us, we create narratives. And that's where we create a story about another person. A story about another person. A number of years ago, I found myself speaking at a conference in Indiana. We're outside this massive auditorium when I'm just kind of walking in, and I've got a message that I feel really good about. I had studied, I had prepped for, but as I'm walking into the auditorium, I'm realizing this entire audience is wildly segregated. And it's not segregated in the ways that you might think that it is. It's segregated with Purdue fans and Indiana fans. And on one side, you have a whole bunch of students and leaders and volunteers and pastors, and they're literally doing this boiler up chant, which is like clap, clap, boiler up, clap, clap, boiler up, which I was like, I didn't even know Purdue was good enough to have a chant, but that's cool. That's cool. And then I started hearing Indiana fans, and Indiana fans are like going, IU, yeah, IU, yeah, and they're just going back and forth. And then the doors open, and as they walk in, people are just screaming at each other. Purdue's so much better than IU. IU's so much better than Purdue. And at this time, I'm like, you guys are both like 4-8 in college football. What are you fighting about? And I'm just seeing this. And they all sit on one side. They sit on another side. Like the 4 Butler fans in the audience sat like right there. And there I am. I'm just watching this. They're not even worshiping together. And I feel like God say, write a new message. And I want you to bring all the Purdue fans on stage and all the Indiana fans on stage. I was like, what? And so I just kind of go with it. So I invite all the Purdue fans, all the Indiana fans, and I say, okay, I want you to nominate one person to be like the spokesperson of your great institution. Purdue guy, IU guy. I walk up to the Purdue guy, I say, hey, tell me why your school is so great. And he goes, we are the greatest factory for NFL quarterbacks. We brought you Bob Greasy. And I'm like, okay. We brought you Drew Brees. I'm like, okay, that's good. And we brought you Kyle Orton. I'm like, good mustache, but a little bit of a stretch. And then IU fan, I'm like, hey, tell me why you think IU is the greatest institution. He's like, Bobby Knight, basketball, Assembly Hall. You look at like the checkered warm-up pants, the history. And I'm like, well, Bobby Knight did punch a player and throw a chair at a referee, but it's cool. I get it. And I'm just sitting here listening. I'm like, this is crazy. And then it hits me. Ask them to say what they like about the other school. So I walk up to the Purdue guy and I said, okay. Tell me one thing that you love or are grateful for about IU. And at first, the guy goes, oh. And then he gets quiet. And I'm like, oh, this is going to bomb. And then I'm looking at him, and he's tearing up. And I'm like, are you crying? And he's like, and I'm like, what? Tell me. Is this a safe place? Tell me. And he goes, my parents bailed on me when I was young. I was raised by my grandparents. And my grandfather taught me about Jesus. My grandfather is the person I want to be like. My grandfather is like as real as they come. And then my grandfather got this form of cancer, this rare form of cancer. And our little town couldn't really take care of him. And so the doctors told us that he needed to go to the Indiana University Cancer Hospital. So we went there. And he spent 6 months there. And our prayers by our church and the wisdom of those doctors saved his life. And I don't know where I'd be if it wasn't for my grandpa and still being here, and if it wasn't for IU doctors taking care of him. And I kid you not, all of these IU fans were like, that's right, we save lives. We're awesome. And it was so human. It was so beautiful. And then I go to Purdue guy, and I go to the IU guy, and I'm like, okay, tell me something great about Purdue. And he just kind of puts his head down. And then someone from Purdue yells, where are you going to school next year? And then he looks up and he said, I was offered some scholarships at some amazing schools across the country, but I want to be an engineer. And Purdue has the best engineering program in the state of Indiana. And no joke, this is what he said. So I'm taking my talents to West Lafayette. And all of Purdue fans were like, yes, that's incredible. We are the best school. Why do I tell you this story? Because it's so easy. It doesn't have to be IU and Purdue. It could be donkeys and elephants. It could be bears and packers. It could be your coworker and your boss. We find ourselves so easily being pulled to take a side and unable to see the actual image of God in another. And somehow we find ourselves creating narratives when we get triggered about another person. But maybe my wife is right. Maybe God is being so kind to try and heal something that's broken within us. And this leads us to the next part, the next word, which is grace. And grace is that free gift that makes us whole, holy, and spiritually healthy. And I love what Peter says in verse 2. He says, like newborn babies, crave pure spiritual milk so that by it you may grow up in your salvation, now that you have tasted that the Lord is good. I love this. I love this. I'm an only child. And so my wife, she's got a ton of brothers and sisters. And I became an uncle this past week for the very first time. And before I flew out here, I stopped by and got to see my nephew. And they named him Carter Ali. And I'm just like, that's my last name. I just feel so pumped about this kid. I'm holding him. He's already a Cubs fan and a Bears fan and a Michigan fan. I'm raising this kid right. It's really, really good. And I'm just holding this, and I'm looking at this kid, and the kid's just sleeping. He doesn't open his eyes at all. He's just sleeping. And I'm sitting here going, this child is so dependent on my brother and sister-in-law. And yet, when I think about that passage of Scripture, so often when we get triggered, we forget that we ought to be dependent on Jesus. Dependent on kind of that pure spiritual milk, that kind of truth that comes from the ways that he taught us to live. And we just end up reacting. Going into hiding, going into insecurity, going into telling a narrative about another person. But we can be people who recognize something about this conversation is triggering me. God, I need more of your grace. I want to be dependent. I don't want to be some kind of prideful person who just reacts. I want to be dependent like a child, saying, teach me what I don't know about myself. Help heal me so that I actually can be a true disciple in this day and age. And that is powerful. So, lastly, what triggers you? And where do you go? And can you imagine if we stopped looking at the other person and we started getting really, really honest and open about us and said, man, this is triggering me because of probably something that's happened in my life. And I'm not going to react. I'm not going to go hide. I'm not going to tell a story. I'm not going to create one that's negative about me or another person. I'm going to choose grace, 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 and I'm going to find myself at the foot of the cross. I'm going to say, Jesus, heal me, and then let me respond with grace and with truth. But I do want you to understand this, and I'll wrap up with this, is that there are times that it is okay to be angry. There is. And I'm going to show you this. In the book of John, it says this, chapter 2. Verse 13, when it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. Now, if you've never seen or been to the temple, I'm not talking about the Old Testament King Solomon's temple that was only 6 acres. I'm talking about King Herod's temple, 30 acres. Josephus, a Jewish historian, says that when you heard of King Herod's temple, you thought it was incredible. But when you saw it with your own eyes, you left utterly amazed, wanting to give reverence to God. But inside this temple, there were boundaries. And there were only certain places that certain people can go. And so here's a little picture of it. Now, you'll see on the left side, the court of priests. That is where, if you were a priest, like a Levitical priest, you could go. And you can kind of see the holy place and the most holy place. That's where like the Shekinah glory, the presence of God, the temple curtain was. And then kind of in the middle, you'll see the court of altar. And that's where the priests could go. And then there's this little line that's called the court of Israel. And that's if you were a Jewish man from one of the 12 tribes, you could go there. And then on the right side, you see the court of women. Now, a man could be in the court of women, but the women could only be there. But think about this. Think if you're an Egyptian and you've heard about King Herod's temple and you want to go on a pilgrimage to see where the presence of Yahweh is. Where do you go? I'm going to zoom out now, and I want you to kind of see the whole temple grounds. Where you would go because you were a Gentile, or in Hebrew, you were Goy, And because you were a goy, you would go to the court of the Gentiles. And that's as far as you could go. I mean, imagine if you found yourself driving up from Iowa and you wanted to come to Heartland and you pulled into the parking lot and they're like, oh, you're from Iowa? You can sit in the coffee shop. That's as close as you could get. And at the temple, there were all of these stones that scholars have found. And this is what they said. No foreigner, meaning no Gentile, is to go beyond the balustrade. I love that word. I don't even know what it means, but it's awesome. And the plaza of the temple zone. Whoever is caught doing so will have himself to blame for his death, which will follow. So, Jesus is at the temple, and he's seeing in the court of Gentiles all of the religious leaders who have set up tables that are exchanging money, and they're selling all of these animals, and all of these people from all over the world and all of these Gentiles aren't able to come to the court. They're basically left outside the entire temple. And Jesus gets angry. He gets really angry. And what I love about this is, you know what it says? It says he made a whip. It says he made a whip. And I'll be honest, going to Home Depot gives me anxiety because I don't know how to fix anything. I always pray, God, I pray that one of those nice men or women in an orange apron will guide me. But I went to Home Depot because I was just like, I'm just going to go find some props just to like make a whip. And I just started to think about this. Jesus must have gathered some like leather, some kind of stick, and just started like kind of making a whip. And I just imagine, like, what's he thinking about as he's making a whip? He's probably looking at this going, this is so wrong. This is so evil. This is so broken. Why can't these people come and stand at my Father's house? Why are they doing this? And he just starts kind of like making a whip. And I started thinking about this like in my prep time and walking around Home Depot looking for these amazing props to make a whip that aren't TSA approved. And I'm like thinking about this and I'm just going, you know when you make a whip, like you gotta probably be thinking, Lord, I just gotta wait on you. I gotta wait on you. And two, like I can't just like act on my own strength. Like I gotta like actually see your vision. It's like waiting on him. And then you got to actually be someone who's like inviting his perspective, inviting his presence into how best do you want me to respond? And so Jesus, as he's making this whip, I imagine him putting this together and him praying and really going, God, this isn't right. This isn't okay. What do you want me to do? And as he's making it, he's waiting on him. He's inviting his perspective, and then he gets it. And he goes through this entire court, flipping over tables, scattering all the money, getting these animals to go crazy, and they're probably running around. Why though? Why would he do this? I want to go to the book of Matthew, and this will be my final passage, I promise. I love the Bible though. We might go a little bit longer, who cares? But it says this. If you go to chapter 2, and what's so crazy in 21, he says this, Jesus entered the temple courts, and he drove out all who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. For it is written, he said to them, my Father's house will be a house of prayer. Stop right there. He's quoting Isaiah. And in rabbinic culture, one of the teaching techniques is all of the religious leaders and all of the men and women in the Jewish culture had memorized the Old Testament. Even Numbers, they knew by heart. And one of the techniques as a teacher is you start the phrase, but you leave out the punchline and you allow the audience to fill it in because it becomes more memorable. So for instance, if I were to actually sing Amazing Grace, I'm going to stop and I'm going to point at you, and I want you to fill it in. Great hymn. Amazing grace, how sweet the, that saved a, like Okay, this is called a remez. That is the Hebrew technique, R-E-M-E-Z. It is the rabbinic teaching technique. And so Jesus flips over tables and turns over kind of the money and the animals, and he says, my Father's house will be a house of prayer. That comes from Isaiah. But he leaves out the one phrase, for all the nations. You know what really breaks God's heart? Is when our actions and our rage ends up pushing people away from the presence of God. That's what makes God angry. That's what made Jesus angry. And I think what we have to really take an honest look at is there anything in our life that is pushing explorers away from encountering the goodness and the presence of God? And sometimes we want to be right. Sometimes we want to win. Sometimes we want someone else to feel something. But I often have to step back, and just like Jesus made a whip, I have to wait on him, invite his perspective, invite his presence before I respond. And when we do that, those who are watching get to see what Jesus' Talmudim, Jesus' disciples, are all about. What triggers you? What's your potholes, and where do you go? And when we invite people to the table, what if people actually experience a group of people who are honest with their potholes? Because they did not want those potholes to become sinkholes. They were honest about where they run off to hiding, where they go in their insecurity, how at times they tell false narratives about another. But what if we as a people were saying, no. More than the hiding, more than insecurity, more than narratives, we are going to be people of grace. Because we need it. We want to be whole and holy and spiritually healthy. But there will be moments that we got to speak up and speak out. And it's going to be for those who have been isolated, those who have been pushed to the fringe, those who have been abused, those who are hurting. We are going to go after them and protect them and bring them in, because our God's grace is for everyone always. Amen? Amen.